So I'm sure you know by now a number of explosive devices were sent to a number of people in America, either on the left or perceived to be on the left. And I want to throw in that perceived to be on the left because it's kind of important. George Soros, which I'm going to get into a bit of a rant at the end of this video. Maxine Waters, I believe she had two sent to her. The Clintons, CNN, I believe Bernie Sanders as well, but I'm not 100% on that. The main thing I want to cover in this is the actual coverage of it, because, well, at the moment we have as much information as we have. But the coverage and the blame is hand in hand, in my opinion, because language matters. How you portray a story impacts how many people listen to it, respond to it, how you label a story, how you put that headline across, because a lot of people don't read entire articles, they will just read the headline. So if the headline is misleading, like illegal immigrant caravan heading towards USA, well, that sends a very negative connotation, and unless you actually bother to go into the details of this, that's what you're going to think. The reality of that particular thing, of the convoy making its way to the United States, is that they're not just immigrants, they are asylum seekers. What they're doing is not illegal. They are heading to particular points, making it a very legal asylum seekers, asylum system. And Trump's response is to murder them. I want that to sink in. Trump's response to asylum seekers is to kill them. Okay, let's move on. So, a lot of this covered in right-leaning media, particularly in Fox, which infuriates me. People like Rush Limbaugh and so on are saying that it's a hoax. Some people have even pinned it on George Soros. That's going to be part of my little rant in a minute. But they're saying that essentially they're downplaying it because it's happening to the left. If it was the other way around, if Fox received a bomb, if Rush Limbaugh, if Alex Jones, then it would be non-stop. It would be a very, very poor choice of words, but it would explode all over the internet. They would never stop about this, and they would be condemning the left over and over and over and over and over again. And to a degree, yes, that should be the appropriate response. So the coverage now that we're seeing, either in American outlets or even in UK outlets, is pathetic and doesn't address the issue. Now, as I've said, language matters. How you report a story matters, and the frequency of how you put it out there matters. The actual statistics, the numbers of terrorist attacks on US soil, 71% of them are carried out by right-wing extremists. The majority of mass shootings are carried out by white males. Now, it's not the rule of thumb, of course, there are exceptions to this, but 71% is a massive number that you cannot overlook. Now, I know you can't say that every single Republican is a terrorist. That's a stupid thing to say. But 71% of terrorist attacks in the US are carried out by people who call themselves Republican or right-wing. That's not something that can be ignored. So then you look at right-wing media, whether it's online or whether it's on TV, like Fox. And what do they do with these situations? They downplay it. These were active bombs designed for a very specific purpose of killing people. So let's look at the people that was actually targeted. George Soros, perceived to be on the left. I'm going to save that a little bit for the rant. Clinton's, again, perceived to be on the left. Now I'm saying perceived because when you actually look at Hillary Clinton's proposals, what she wanted to do, what she said, what she's actually done, she's Republican. And that's the biggest criticism I have of Democrats in the US, that when you get to that level, when you get to the state level, they are essentially Republicans just wearing blue. It's infuriating, but that's what it is. But they're still perceived to be on the left, despite the fact that almost all of her political views are right-leaning. And I have to say almost all of her political views because during the campaign you couldn't really say what she stood for. So it was more copying things that a few other people had said, and maybe that would work, but then you just look at her actual political career and extremely right-leaning. So Bernie Sanders, very left, very progressive. Maxine Waters. Now Maxine Waters was the interesting one because she had two. Not one bomb, two bombs sent to her. Now, as far as I can tell, Maxine Waters' crime in this was saying you should criticise your government. And that leads me into the language that the media uses when covering things. Essentially, bombs were sent to pretty much anyone who said negative things about Trump. And I said CNN. CNN hasn't made up things about Donald Trump. In fact, they've been very, very forgiving towards Trump. But the negative things that they've said is just reporting what he's doing. Saying that the man is a liar is not saying anything that's not true. His lie count a couple of months ago was over 1,400. So he is a liar. And that's just since taking office. Lies multiple times a day, sometimes in the same sentence. That's who Trump is. He is a con man. He is a revolting human being. That's who Trump is. So when you call him out on a few of his more despicable policies, like throwing children in cages, where these children are being abused, where they're being put into orphanages owned by Betsy DeVos. The DeVos family, we recently found out, gave a huge amount of money to Donald Trump in the past, which kind of explains why Betsy DeVos now has such a prominent position in the Trump administration and is profiting on children who are being torn away from their families. I can't say that enough. Trump has taken the children of families and made them orphans. Why? Well, I have a few choice words, but I will try to keep it civil. Not calling Trump out doesn't make you impartial. It makes you just as bad as he is. So when the media, whether it's CNN, whether it's the BBC, whether it's Sky News, whether it's Fox, when they cover his rallies and they don't point out how disgusting it is to point to the journalists in the back as Trump is insulting them and inciting violence against them, they become as responsible because they are enabling language to warp people's minds. Now, language is a beautiful thing, and I'm not a fan of political correctness in its actual format, but you have to call people out and you have to report things properly. So the fact that Trump has recently put out one tweet saying that he doesn't condone violence towards journalists Well, that contradicts what he's been saying for 2 years. And again, this is not going into his whole life, this is just the last 2 years, where he has incited violence towards journalists. He has incited violence towards the Democrats, towards people who are on the left and perceived to be on the left. And that's what this seems to be. Anyone who has criticised Trump seems to be a target for this nut job, or this group of nut jobs. Now I want to get into George Soros because of the projection that the right-wing media is doing, saying that it's essentially George Soros who is behind all of this, because George Soros is behind everything ever, just point blank. He's people aren't really fleeing war-torn countries in caravans for asylum. They're actually they're paid by Soros just because, shits and giggles. George Soros paid someone to send a few bombs out, including to him. I could go on and on and on, but I hope that you get from the tone of my voice how pathetically moronic it is. Now, George Soros himself gets a lot of shit because he has given donations to people on the left. He gave a lot of money to Hillary Clinton in the last presidential election. Now, if Soros was truly on the left, he would have given that money to Bernie Sanders. And Trump would not be in the headlines at all. Bernie would be president. America would not be heading down this dark path. And certainly when a neo-Nazi murdered an innocent civilian on American soil, the President of the United States would not have fucking come out saying, there's good people on both sides. Because it would have been Bernie Sanders and not a white supremacist. George Soros is not some magnificent architect of the left who funds all these left-wing conspiracy idiocracies. He himself has said he is reluctantly a Democrat. Not that he believes in democratic ways, not that he believes in left ways, but because that's probably the closest thing that he identifies with, so he gives money to the left. If he was a true progressive, he would not have given money to Hillary Clinton. He would have given it to Bernie Sanders or someone like Bernie Sanders. But that's not what he did. This man is more centrist, slightly leaning left, but the majority of everything that happens, from the right at least, it all comes down to Soros. Now, where does this come from? Well, who owns the media that you consume? BBC, Sky News, Fox News. Well, almost all of it is owned by the Murdochs and the Mercers, and a few other right-wing or right-leaning groups. What are their interests? Keep the rich rich, keep the poor poor. That's what we're seeing. That's what we get every single day. Austerity, not just in the UK, but also in the US, is repulsive. Is there a reason for it? No. Because every actual study done into it says that austerity doesn't work. But the right want to keep the wealthy wealthy and the poor poor. So how do you distract? Hey, there's this incredibly wealthy guy and he gave money to the left. So let's say he did all this crazy shit. Okay. If you genuinely believe at least half the crap that comes out about Soros, I'm sorry, but you're a dumbass. Now, I don't mean to say it in such a negative or hateful way, but that's what it is. Yes, you should criticize where everything comes from, because that's just good practice. But if something comes out and someone says George Soros was responsible for Pizzagate. No. That was a moron on the right. The same dickhead who actually got James Gunn fired. Now, I don't particularly care one way or the other who directs the next Guardians of the Galaxy film, but the fact that someone who has come out and said that date rape is not a thing pretty much told Disney what they can do with their own films, that annoys me. That wasn't George Soros. These bombs were not sent by George Soros. There are not members of ISIS in caravans moving their way towards America funded by George fucking Soros. Criticize where you get your information from. And just because someone says something that's not positive about Trump doesn't mean it's a lie. It doesn't mean that it's made up. And 9 times out of 10, it's probably true, and Trump just doesn't want to fucking admit it.